Hi guys, welcome back. You will be engaging in mini module call 2, text in our discipline, with myself, Ashley, and my friend, Jen.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, and we are ready to get started.
All right, so we have a few goals for our short time together today. We're going to explore 3 different things. So we're going to come to a common understanding of what text is and a definition around that, explore things to consider when approaching a text, and then determine how best to support our students before, during, and after reading experiences within your discipline.
Awesome. And so in leading us into meeting those goals, we're going to start with doing a metaphor activity here. So the question that we're going to pose to you today is, which image serves as a metaphor for how you are feeling at this point in the ALM training? Okay, so we're going to do a little think aloud for you here as well and share our thinking with you guys. So we have a variety of traditional and non-traditional text here. We have a collection of classic lit. We have a page from a comic book. We have an image that represents TED Talk videos. We have a painting. We have a cereal box. A collection of bumper stickers, a black and white photo, a billboard, and some graffiti. So I am going to say that I am a box of Lucky Charms, maybe even more so the leprechaun on the box of Lucky Charms. So when I look at that text, that image, and when I'm reading it, things that I'm seeing, that leprechaun is juggling and balancing some really bright, beautiful, sparkly parts and pieces that come together in his pot of gold, which is his cereal bowl. So like myself and this work that we're doing, I feel like we have subdomains and we have strategies. We have lots of sparkly, bright pieces that when they all come together, they land in this beautiful pot of gold, which is the ALM.
I love that, Ashley. My metaphor is not as sparkly because, well, none of the other texts are as sparkly, but that's okay. So when I was listening to you, I kind of thought about, bringing this together, but more so with us coming together as colleagues and working together and leaning on each other for our expertise and our experiences and just to bounce ideas off of each other. So when I look at that billboard down at the bottom and it says, "We're all in this together," I know that's a phrase that we have thrown around a lot over the past couple of months in response to COVID. But it's all something that I think relates to ALM and that we are in this all together. And you're going to have, hopefully coaches within your building, coaches from CTL. You're going to have colleagues from your grade level or your content area that you can lean on throughout the year. And then ALM strategies to also lean on to support your students as they learn new content. So I just kind of think of that we're all in this together idea. Kind of helps us get through this, right?
Right.
So those of you that are watching this as a pre-recorded video, just take for a second and kind of think about which one represents your feelings at this point. Metaphor making is a great way to elicit some critical thinking from your students. So we have this guiding question for the first part of our call here, which is, how do we define text? What is text? So we're going to go back to this, to these images here, and Ashley's going to walk us through that.
Yeah, so, we've been kind of unpacking during the ALM training. Text is what we put our eyes to make meaning, right? So when we think about all of these things that are on here, they all are text because we can put our eyes to them and read them to help us make meaning, right? And there's lots of different parts and pieces that we have to read in these images to help us make sense of those texts, right? So when we think about what we put in front of our students to read and make sense of, it's really important in thinking about what it is that we want them to do with that text and which skills we want them to apply to the text that they're reading, right? And we get that information, as we know, from our standards.
So a lot of us, grew up with text for just our textbooks. We had our science textbook and our ELA textbook. We might have had different novels that we read in our ELA classroom. So those were primarily text. They were full of words. But as we move into this idea of more non-traditional text, maybe non-traditional learning, as we do more virtual learning, we lean more on things like Newsela for more digital text, and even videos like on YouTube to help our students access content. So when we think about texts, we have two different things. We look at it as a traditional sense of a textbook, but when we broaden our definition of text, we can welcome in these other sources for text that might look a little bit differently.
You're right. So now kind of think about your own discipline. So for me, that would be ALA. So we want to think about when our students are approaching a text in our content area, what is it that they need to attend to? What are the components of the text that they might read in our discipline or in our content area that we know we have to be mindful to teach and mindful to consider when we're setting them up for before, during, and after reading strategies? Mm-hmm. So we have some here that we're going to post. Yeah, so we have these 8 components here that come to us from Thinner and Snyder. And what they tell us is, regardless of what your content area is, we all have these 8 components in common, right? So when we think about the text that students might read in a math class, science, ELA, social studies, music, for example, we're going to think about things such as organization and structure and purpose, the amount of text, whether it's written or it's spoken in a video, for instance, the density, the coherence and cohesion, the function, and the audience. And we're going to apply those 8 components to some examples here for you to help it just make a little bit more sense.
And so, thinking about these in different content areas, but also with the different types of text that you will see in those different content areas. So we've got some examples here for you. We have a periodic table of the elements that you would likely see in a science classroom. We have a nutrition chart that you might see in a home ec classroom. The Declaration of Independence that you might see in a social studies classroom. We have a math word problem here. And we also have this black and white photograph that you might find in an ELA classroom. So when we think about those components of text and how those apply here and what we need to be mindful of, the one thing that came to mind of us with the periodic table of elements is the organization, because that is really crucial in understanding what the periodic table of elements, what that text means, and to understand the different elements represented here. So if you're like Ashley and I and have to Google what the organization of the periodic table of elements is, you will discover that it's arranged from left to right, top to bottom, in order of increasing atomic number. Yes, we are not science experts, but we have resources, right? So the organization is a really important feature of the periodic table of elements. Next, we think about structure. So when looking at this nutrition chart, we see things such as there's a header, there's a title, there's a lot of color being used, there are graphics to support the information. Vitamins and minerals that are listed here are kind of grouped into different categories. and then they're listed in alphabetical order within those. So having some understanding of the structure will help support your students in digesting the information that's on here.
Yeah, and being able to comprehend the information.
Yeah,
that is on there.
absolutely. When we think of the purpose, the Declaration of Independence was something that if we understand the purpose behind it, it will help us understand the content within it. So the purpose was to explain to the whole world why the 13 British colonies were seeking to start their own country. Another example here with the Declaration of Independence is the amount of text. So to give you a number on how many words are in the Declaration of Independence, we Googled this too. There is 1,458 words, I should say there are, in the Declaration of Independence, which includes 56 signatures. So thinking about that text and the idea of considering whether you need to chunk it, whether, you really need to focus on the entirety of the piece or just pieces and parts. Are you looking at just who signed it? And so just looking at those signatures. So the amount of text is something to consider when looking at a piece of text. When we think of the density, like in this math word problem here, the word problem or the question in and of itself, it says here, if I can move this, there are 125 sheep and 5 dogs in a flock. How old is the shepherd? So the words in and of itself, those are kind of light, but the density comes into where it's asking students to consider. So the same could be said for the black and white photograph up in the corner, is that the image is pretty simple, but there is the content around this photograph is very dense, and what we're trying to get students to pull away from this photograph. Another idea here is coherence and cohesion. So when we revisit that nutrition chart, the words, the phrases, and the sentences about vitamins and minerals, they come together to create a text where the relationships between those elements are really clear and they're logical to the reader. Let's see. One other was the function here. So the function or the purpose of the periodic table of elements is to arrange all the known elements in an informative array. So you can tell by looking at it that the number of atomic elements in the first one is going to be much different than the one in the bottom right-hand corner. And then finally, if we go back to this photograph here, we included the source over here to the side because that's really important in understanding who the audience of this piece was. So this photograph was published in an Indiana newspaper back in 1948. So the audience of the readers was the newspaper and the time that the newspaper was published. So those are things to keep in mind when choosing text for your lesson and how to support students in comprehending those texts. So we have.
All right. Sorry, I have a visitor. So my dog has decided to join me. So
my dog isn't barking right now, so that's good.
So we want you guys to do this, and you've probably already been doing it as you've looked at the examples that we've been sharing with you. But what are your considerations for designing instructional experiences around text of your discipline? Okay, so thinking about the types of text that students are going to be reading in your discipline, what do you need to be mindful of when you are creating those before, during, and after literacy experiences for your students?
Yeah, so for instance, if you are, if you're showing a video, so let's go back to that non-traditional text, the YouTube video, and thinking about different ways that you might support your students in viewing that. So thinking about, what is the density of that? What is the function and the purpose of that? How is that video organized? So thinking about those things, but also thinking about, the speed of the video. Is it really fast? Is there a lot of content to process in that video? So YouTube has a nice feature where you can slow down the speed of a video. So that's something to consider. Another thing with videos is that idea when we read a traditional text of being able to go back and reread a sentence or a paragraph. So if you're a slow processor, kind of like me, I often find myself going back and rereading pieces. So a video having that opportunity to pause, rewind, go back kind of gets to that same idea. With videos, adding subtitles so that text is in front of your students as they're listening. So all of those things can really help set your students up for being able to comprehend that text, even though it is a video. So we have this arch. As teachers are designing instruction, they have this framework in mind, which we have provided you to go alongside of your ALM model, and putting that into place as you plan your lessons. But you also get standards and targets from the state. You have curriculum resources from your school district. And so thinking about how all of those come in, bridge together, and how they come together to support your students' learning. So that's where ALM fits in. And we talk a lot about strategies and different strategies to support your students through the ALM, but strategies in and of themselves are not what's so powerful. It's really what you do with those strategies. So thinking about this question, why are strategies so important? Well, strategies, they support engagement, they support collaboration, and they encourage participation from all of your students, so that you don't just have the ones who raise their hand the fastest, and while the ones that sit in the back with their hoodies pulled over them are left to kind of fend for themselves. So you get everybody engaged in the learning process. Anything else you want to add to that, Ashley?
No, I think that was beautifully said. Thank you, Jen.
So then we have this chart that Ashley is going to walk us through, which it looks like I expanded this when we were trying to read it, and I forgot to shrink it back down, but that's all right. So pretend it's kind of shrunk back down.
So going back to those 8 components that we mentioned earlier. So we were very mindful of that when we were looking and studying and reading closely this body of text for this example here. So what we have noticed is that some of the things that we might need to be mindful of, those 8 components, if we introduce this as a text in our classroom, is how this is organized, right? So we want to pay attention to the organization of this chart, these charts inside of a bigger chart. We want to pay attention to its purpose, which were given on this page itself. And we want to think about the density. So even though there are very few words per se on this body of text, it is still quite dense in the amount of information that we can extract from it, right? So we knew that. So in thinking about how it's organized, what its purpose is, and the density of it, we kept those 3 things in mind as we were planning the before, the during, and after lesson around this text. So keeping those things in mind, we were thinking about, okay, we want students to, we want to activate their prior knowledge about COVID and its spread and its increases. And so we might use a strategy in the before part to set them up for the during that might be a Think, Inc. pair share. So one of the questions that we might ask, and there are a million different ways you could enter into this body of text. So this is just one think aloud on our part, but something such as, based on your background knowledge, which state or states has had a recent increase in the number of COVID cases, right? So for myself, if I'm thinking like a student, I might write down the word Florida. And I might be prepared to talk about the reason why I picked Florida is because my family and I had a vacation planned to Florida this summer, which we had to cancel because my mom was worried about the number of cases in Florida. And it's increased since when we had originally planned our vacation, right? So that might be my thinking that I've written that I'm prepared to bring to my pair share with my partner.
Yeah, so then as we move into the during piece of our lesson, as students interact with this text, and we go back to that idea of density, and there are so many different ways that you can pull information from this chart of charts, as Ashley was kind of saying earlier, right? It's a chart full of mini charts. But one way that we thought is to have students go into small groups or work with a partner and engage in a list group label, in which they can look at all of the different charts here and see how the different states are represented and identify and put them into different groups and then label those groups. So some ways they might do that is maybe by coastal or non-coastal states, maybe by the rate of increase in states, maybe by the number of cases in states, maybe by the region that they're located in states, whether or in the U.S., whether it's the northwestern part of the United States or the southeast or whatever it might be. And so then we can move into this after piece, after they've engaged with this text and they've processed some of the information in this text. The after piece might be engaging in a gallery walk in which those partners are small groups. They walk around and they observe how other groups grouped those states and those charts, that information, and how they labeled them. So that those three pieces, the before, during, and after, would be a really nice bridge to really help students process all the information that's in here. So they've activated their prior knowledge. They brought in some of their own schema, their own experiences prior to coming to this text. Then they've engaged with the data that's represented here and all the information, the density of it, and had a chance to process that. And then they've also come back and have a chance to do some synthesis around this text.
Yeah, so our three words were organization, purpose, and density. And so they have also not only explored density, but they've also reorganized. So they're definitely paying attention to the way this is organized here and the way it's presented in its original form, and then how they would like to choose to organize this information a second time, and also in thinking about keeping that purpose the same, and then changing that purpose when they create their labels in the list group and label piece of it.
Right. So to finish out this call, we do have an exit ticket for you. It's kind of your accountability piece for joining and watching this call today. So if I come out of here, I will show you, you'll click on, we will have this next to the video in the mini module page on our Google site. But it's this Google form here, which just has a couple of questions around this idea of text and approaching text in your disciplines. So that is all we have for you in our mini module call number 2. We will see you tomorrow during, hopefully you'll come to our live mini module call at 9:30 or join us for one of our deep dive calls at 11 or 1:30 in the afternoon. See you there.
Thank you.